Welcome to Business as Unusual. This is the live stream where we explore the pressing issues and emerging trends shaping the business landscape. I'm Kathy Steele, and I'm the CEO of Red Caffeine and your host today. And for those of you that are not familiar with Red Caffeine, we are a growth consultancy, which means we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market organizations. Our work includes everything from brand repositioning to new product and services launches to tech enablement consulting. But most often, we're focused on building revenue generation systems that fuel long-term growth. So last month, we heard directly from Marty Bonder and Amy Anderson about an Anchor Harvey integration that we recently launched. So Marty is with our client, Anchor Harvey, and Amy Anderson is with the Red Caffeine team. And we stepped through what it takes to integrate an acquisition successfully. So today we're going to step back and we're going to look at that bigger picture and what it means for a private company to use mergers and acquisitions as part of their growth strategy. This session is sort of a one-on-one for mid-market leaders who may be weighing organic growth against acquisitions or simply wants to understand how M&A can help them compete with larger PE-backed firms. We'll walk through the fundamentals, we'll talk about financing, risks to avoid, and some of the questions that you should be asking yourself to really understand if your business is ready to make a purchase or if it's not the right timing. So we're excited to have Barnett Rogers with us today. Barnett, thanks for joining me. Could you give us a short intro about your career, what you're currently doing? And I always love you to share something that's not on your professional bio.
Okay, great. No, thanks for having me, Kathy. I got into M&A somewhat unconventionally, I should say. I've been in manufacturing my whole career, started as an engineer, kind of worked myself up the ranks through manufacturing businesses up through general management. I always had an interest in kind of the strategic side of things. I was always looking at, how do we build this business? How do we go faster? And what other things we can do? Always very interested in what the competitors were doing. And so that kind of led me towards corporate development, which is kind of the section of a business that focuses on strategy and inorganic growth initiatives such as M&A. And so did that most recently prior to my role right now at RFO Corporation, which is a family office. I was with Transcendia, which is a private equity-backed plastics manufacturer based in Franklin Park, Illinois. And I continue to do M&A type of work at the family office as well. So a little bit different. A lot of corporate development people kind of grow up through kind of a finance role, more consulting type role into corporate development. In my case, I grew up from more kind of the operational, technical side of things. I think it bodes well for kind of the stuff that we look at and really being able to understand a business and M&A, and we can kind of get a little more into that further into the deck. One maybe interesting fact that isn't on my resume is that I grew up in France. So I was born in Europe, moved to France when I was quite young and did most of my growing up there. Maybe a side fun fact, I wanted to be a chef growing up. Growing up in France, a lot of great food. It was pretty exciting. Very different from corporate development and finance and M&A, but those are kind of two related fun facts.
Oh, I love that. I mean, honestly, France, one of my favorite countries to visit. I have been all over France, and I love French food. So I think we share a lot of commonality there.
Yeah.
I feel like I do remember when we first met, you were on the M&A team, but you also had a lot of responsibility around technology and like that chief operating officer, sort of the operations hat as well. So probably part of the deal team as well as helping integrate those organizations as you grew that business.
Right.
So before we start getting into like some of the deeper things around M&A, I'd love to start with just some, definitions. We often hear terms thrown around. I literally have sometimes had to take notes because I'll learn something new every time I attend a M&A event. But mergers, acquisitions, that seems pretty popular. But platform companies, bolt-ons, roll-ups. Can you talk us through a little bit of the terminology, just so we can level set what the options are in terms of M&A?
Correct. Yeah. So M&A is kind of a big term. Mergers and acquisitions. I think in most M&A, it's really an acquisition. Merger is typically when you think of two larger companies joining together. They may not even trade any cash at all. They're just going to be trading shares in each other. And so mergers are typically thought of kind of big business type of stuff. Acquisitions is really any transaction in which one company buys the shares or the majority of the assets of another business. And that's typically what we'll be thinking of and talking about as more kind of the acquisition side of thing, which fits more kind of the small and medium sized businesses that we're, I think, focused on here today. A platform company is a term that you'll hear quite a bit, especially in the private equity space. That's when you think of a private equity company saying, we want to get into a particular industry and we're going to buy that first business in that industry. So, an investment company or private equity firm that isn't currently in packaging, for example, may go out and look for a kind of good sized packaging business that then they could use to bolt on other businesses. And that's the other term that you mentioned, Kathy. Bolt on is also something that bolt on could be thought of as a typically a smaller business relative to your platform that you're bolting on and that you're growing as you go. And then that's, I think, once you've put bolt-ons onto a platform, then you have a roll-up. And so that's another terminology that's heard a lot in this space. A roll-up is really just a grouping of companies in which an investment firm has strategically and purposefully gone out and acquired multiple businesses to put them all together into a single business, typically rebrand them all under a single brand, have a single kind of C-suite management team that oversees them. And so that's how you can kind of think of those different terms.
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to see so much happen in the coming years. There's another word float or another phrase floating around, the silver tsunami. There is going to be a pretty massive wealth transfer that will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. And as private owners are thinking about how to continue to grow their organizations, how they can compete against organizations that may be a little bit better funded. I think that's really what we're hoping to kind of set the table for today. So how are some of these smaller organizations or mid-market companies leveraging M&A or thinking about acquisition as kind of a way to level the playing field against competition that may be more well-funded or provide a more end-to-end solution?
Yeah, we live in a world in which the competition is always growing, always moving, always changing. We have very well-funded competitors now. It's no longer just maybe a single owner of the business who's running his or her own balance sheet, trying to grow the business day by day, but it's large investment firms that come with almost infinite capital to be able to grow the business and acquire more. And that makes them more efficient. That gives them access to new technologies and be able to adapt and evolve, faster than maybe, smaller businesses. And in turn, that could, pose a risk to a smaller business owner who it doesn't necessarily look at their business that way, or necessarily have the capital, or has had the desire, or need maybe even to have to go out and kind of grow rapidly or transform their business at a pace that they're not familiar with. I think there's a lot to be said about just technology evolving that much faster. Everything's connected right anymore. And again, coming from the lens of the manufacturer, you think there's not, almost every device you buy anymore is attached to the internet, and you can have an app for it. My garage door opener, has an app, and you can connect to it remotely. And so those are technologies that are kind of hard to implement, and the bigger businesses can do that better. They can kind of spread the cost of the technology over more revenue, and so for smaller businesses that are looking to stay relevant, to stay competitive, sometimes M&A is a way to get the scale that you need, so that you can have more resources to apply to development and growth. But it's also a way to kind of keep up with the technology as well. And sometimes developing a technology in house is just not feasible, and being able to go out there and acquire that is a way of keeping up with things.
Yeah, I think it's that, build or buy. I think there's a case for both. And I know that you have a slide that sort of shows the options of, when you're comparing organic growth to acquisition, what should be, on an owner's mind, like in terms of trade-offs, or, what are some of the things that could be weighted most heavily. I think we've got sort of a table to kind of walk through the different considerations.
Right. So like any business endeavor, there's risk involved in doing something, and there's sometimes risk in not doing something.
Right.
And so that's something that to consider. But some of the kind of the key areas that one needs to think about as they look at doing M&A are outlined here on this slide. Of course, speed of growth, right? M&A, you can buy the revenue immediately, you can buy the technology, you can buy access to a geography, you can buy clients immediately. Of course, the organic option, it's much kind of smaller, gradual process of achieving that, and maybe in some cases near impossible if it's a particular technology that you just don't have the skill sets in house to be able to develop. Then maybe your only option is to go and acquire that. And then as it relates to kind of control, right? Through M&A, there's a potential loss of culture and control depending upon how things are financed. Of course, doing it organically, it's much more gradual. You still have full control over your business. You haven't kind of given anything up by going out and doing M&A. Cost is another issue. Of course, there's the high upfront costs of running through the process in terms of kind of legal and accounting. There's integration costs, and then the actual cost of acquiring the business that one needs to think up. So it's kind of a high upfront dollar, versus organic growth can be typically a little more steady, and you might have just a small percentage of your budget that you contribute every year to growing, be it through commercial routes or through product routes. And so there's a lot less kind of financial risk doing the organic way versus the M&A. But again, M&A brings all the other benefits that we've talked about and will continue to talk about. Risk plays into kind of all these different considerations, but of course M&A, I think if people have any people who do follow M&A will have heard that M&A can fail, and often does. And there's a failure at the integration level in terms of moving things and incorporating sales teams and operations teams, and then there's a risk of overpaying for a business, and so that then just means that it's that much harder to kind of get a return. Then there's a risk that there's a kind of a change in the market. You've bought a business based on an assumption of where they will continue to trade or how that business will grow. And if there's a change in how that performs, and then you borrowed a lot of money to acquire that business, that can be potentially problematic as well. So but then on the flip side, like anything you did, there's always risk in anything you do. Yes, there might be lower risk in the organic approach, but you might miss something taking the organic route. You might just kind of miss a particular trend, and by not scaling fast enough. And then another, I think, key area and we've talked about this as well a bit, but one, key consideration is expanding your, capabilities, right? So you'll do M&A so you can get immediate access to new technology, to a new end market. If you're currently based in the Midwest, but you want to, grow out in the West, well, acquiring a business in the West is a way to do that. And then access to customers. If you've got a product that you like to be able to sell to a certain customer, but you can't get through to them, buying a business that already sells maybe a competing product or a different product to those customers, it gives you that immediate access. And again, on the organic route, well, it's the same thing, but just much lower, and also requires funds as well. So it's one of those things that you kind of have to kind of think about all these different buckets and kind of weigh the pros and cons of each, and what makes most sense for your business at that time.
Yeah, it feels like, what we're seeing a lot happen is some challenges with, after the transaction, and businesses are trying to move their business forward. There's so much work that goes into putting a deal together. There's not always that same level of planfulness post the transaction. So I definitely feel like there is risk both ways. But I'm curious if there are just specific situations where staying focused on organic growth is still the smarter play, even though there might be a lot of competitive pressure around consolidation in a particular vertical.
Yeah, there are times where not doing M&A does make sense. If your business is performing well, if it's protected by a moat, whether it be kind of cost competitive strengths or technology strength, or you've got just a great brand, or you're in a particular geography that is inaccessible to others. And there's continued demand for your products, so that you still kind of see a path to growth and the product and customers that you serve, then perhaps M&A is not necessary. I mean, of course, there's situations where we talked about valuations, right? If valuations are just very high, well, then again, you might want to just sit it out and not go out and do M&A. Culture is an important as one as well. You might find what appears to be a great business that checks all the boxes for you as it relates to product and technology and geography. But there's just such a huge difference between the cultures of those business that kind of bringing that business potentially into the fold, or vice versa, you kind of bringing your business into the target's business, may be too disruptive, and may cause a situation where it's just kind of too risky to do that, and those problems will be seen in the integration. Those are different areas. And then of course you've got to be ready.
Yeah.
If you're a business, if it's like you gotta earn, I always say you've got to earn the right to do M&A. So the train's got to be running on time. You've got to have a team that's cohesive. Your kind of internal problems need to be kind of to a minimum. If you've got all your ducks in a row, then going outside and looking at acquiring another business can make sense, but really not until you're in your got your own house in order, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I definitely feel like the most successful M&A situations that we've been involved in have been really planful and well orchestrated, and the leadership team is all in. I do feel like there's still this cloak of secrecy around M&A activities, unless your business puts on this stance around being really acquisitory, and that's just part of their marketplace, so they've got a reputation for it, so it's not a secret. Or even startups, I think, that have been funded out of the gate have this transparent approach to like there will be an eventual event, but most organizations that are considering succession or sale tend to be a lot more secretive. So that I feel like lends itself to a lot of challenges post the transaction just because it had to be done in sort of a behind the scenes way versus being more open and transparent.
Right.
So as you're thinking as businesses are thinking about this, I know that you have a lot of thoughts around what that M&A life cycle looks like. I think you've got we've even got a slide that kind of walks through the key stages. Can you take us through the process?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think kind of zooming all the way out, once you've identified a target and you want to get kind of something closed, it's really kind of a 3 to 5 month process. So think of the actual M&A process of, okay, you've engaged with a seller, and you're going to start discussing price and structure, terms, legal documents, due diligence, all that stuff. That's really kind of a 5 month process. But zooming in really, and that kind of first arrow there on strategy and target identification. That's something I say 2 months. That's really maybe kind of a strategy. If you haven't really done M&A, haven't really thought about what you want to buy, having that strategic process of sitting down with your team, your closest team members, and discussing, okay, what do we want to buy and why, and going through all the kind of main categories of things to consider in a potential target. The obvious ones are, size and geography and types of products they manufacture. But then you might want to even drill down further into some of the cultural elements. As well, and really understand kind of what makes sense for you, so that as you go out there and start identifying targets, you've got a framework that you can use to qualify potential targets as yeses, maybes, or definite nos. And so I say that's that kind of 2 month process, of developing that M&A strategy internally. And then go
Arnett,
ahead. Yeah.
kind of like it sounds a lot like the sales process where you're really honing in on like ideal profile characteristics that would be um, kind of filling a void in your organization, like you said, whether it's, a geographic expansion opportunity, you're going to add capabilities, you're going to add a unique technology or something like that, but you're really pinpointing the different kind of persona characteristics similar to what you'd be doing in the sales process of a targeted prospect that you would be directly working with. Is that accurate? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's something you're looking for a fit, right?
Right. Okay.
And so very much. I think I definitely recommend that people don't try to grow just for the sake of growing. And but you really want to think about it, checking these boxes that you really thought through. And then kind of further elaborating on the first arrow there, target identification, that's just ongoing. That's something that you should be doing all the time. If you're serious about M&A, you should kind of always be thinking about different targets. And I know we'll talk a little bit more later on that, as far as what business owners can do if they want to get in the M&A game. But that really is, as I said, an ongoing process. So moving to kind of arrow two, that's going to, okay, a target has been identified, and there's an understanding that they want to sell, you want to buy. That could be through a proprietary, what we call a proprietary deal, is that the owner, they know you, or an introduction was made and you're really kind of buyer and seller having that discussion. Or it could be through either a brokered process through an investment bank, or a business broker has brought an opportunity to you, and then you're kind of participating in an auction. And the process is similar in many ways. Either route you take, of course, in an auction, it's more competitive, and you don't necessarily have the kind of one-on-one, direct rapport with the seller like you might have in a proprietary deal. But you would maybe think kind of those initial discussions and discovery, kind of figuring out what the business really does, meeting with management, really trying to understand how that business would fit in with your business, putting together some internal models, maybe looking at what we call cost synergies, which is an important thing to consider. Is can you save costs by merging these or acquiring this business and merging it into your own? Are there going to be sales synergies? Can you sell more to their customers? Can you sell more of their product to your customers? Those types of things you'll be discussing and thinking about in this stage two. And then kind of at the end of that kind of 2 to 4 week process, you should be in a position to say, okay, we want to bid on this business and make an offer. At that point, if it's kind of accepted, your offer's accepted, then you kind of move to the next stage, where you're going to go into kind of full due diligence. And at that point, that's where I think the costs really start to mount. You're going to bring in attorneys who are going to help draft the legal documents. And then you're going to bring in potentially accountants to help with some of the financial due diligence. Your own team, your own internal operations teams and sales team, you might have a team of 2 to 6 people involved over those kind of 2 to 3 months of due diligence, verifying that the information that's been told is correct, and trying to uncover any possible areas of risk during that due diligence period. Again, that takes kind of 2 to 3 months, and then you've got closing at the end of that, once all the documents are drafted and you've kind of gone through all of your due diligence and everything makes sense, and the final price is negotiated. In some cases, you have what you kind of enter that post close. So the closing happens, you announce it to your employees, you announce it to the target's employees, you announce it to customers and suppliers, and then really the hard work begins at that point. The M&A process is pretty straightforward. It's demanding because it's something that you kind of parachute in and out of as opportunities come and go. But really that kind of post-close process and then integration is where most of the work happens, and where a lot of the risk happens in that kind of first 3 to 12 months, as far as doing that right.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, like, is there any shared stories that you can talk about where in that, like, arrow number 4, where you're really getting into due diligence, and you feel like you've unearthed a lot of information, but post close, the data is not what you thought it would be, or the performance that you or trajectory of the forecasts and things have not happened. Like, talk through some of the potential scenarios that you've seen that really haven't been validated in that full due diligence process.
Um, Yeah, so I mean, a few things that come to mind. One was just inventory. Like where we during the financial due diligence, we didn't do enough kind of physical checks on inventory, and come to find out kind of after the fact that there was a kind of a big difference between actual inventory and the inventory that we thought we were buying. So those type of things can kind of come up in at kind of post close. I've seen it in the past where there's kind of certain liabilities as well. So payables, bills kind of come out of nowhere, stuff like that need to be addressed kind of post close. I think, one of the things that really comes out post close that is really almost impossible to due diligence is the team that you're acquiring, when you go and acquire a business, you're typically dealing with a few members of the management team of the target. It's not until after you close the business and you're able to kind of go into the business and interact with the employees where you might find out that some employees aren't quite what you thought you were getting in terms of what they were doing and the value that they were providing or what their actual skill sets were. So those are types of things that can happen that either could be uncovered during due diligence if more work was done. More often than not, the biggies do come out in due diligence. Where we were in a deal once where there was a lot of potential liability related to some product recalls.
Mm,
And we spent a lot of time working through it, just in terms of understanding that potential liability, as well as trying to kind of quantify the cost and put in certain hooks and protections in the definitive agreements so that that liability wasn't all borne by us. And, we kind of reach this give or take moment where we need to really gotta we've got to take on some risk. The seller's got to take on some risk, and in order to kind of get the deal done, you've got to really dive deep into sometimes pretty technical things in order to take a view that this is a manageable risk, and it's more of a known risk than an unknown. But sometimes you get into things, and yeah, they're just huge red flags and very concerning. It almost feels like the deal is dead, and there's just no way to get through it. But putting the teams together, both the buyers teams and the sellers teams and attorneys, and figuring out a workaround often leads to great results. And so you want to have those types of conversations during due diligence and before close. But there are, as I said, there are things that either you can't really catch or that you just missed. And often during smaller deals, if you're going to go and spend $5 million acquiring a business, you're not necessarily going to want to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on due diligence. And so it's easier to kind of maybe miss things on smaller deals because you're just not as prone or likely to want to invest all that time and money into as thorough of a due diligence as you would otherwise probably should use or as you would see on a bigger deal.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I love you to, I have a viewpoint around transparency that I don't know that is commonly shared with everyone. I've been on deals where it's been completely transparent to a lion's share of the team. And then I've also, been a part of deals where at the board level and at sort of the leadership team level, everybody is aware. But talk a little bit about, the stages and kind of when you're informing customers and internal stakeholders, what is the most common practices around that?
So I think really during the kind of initial discussions and that kind of valuation, offer letter, general deal structure type of discussions, you're really going to have just kind of a few people on either side. And let's just say it's a proprietary deal where it's buyer and seller who are working together, and there's not necessarily a banker involved, but you're going to have 2 to 3 people on your team. Or you're going to be part of the kind of in the room, what we say under the tent, having those discussions, and then same thing likely on the seller side. I think you noted earlier, buyers and sellers are particularly quite cagey, more the sellers than the buyers, but buyers are very cagey about a potential sale process. And so at that kind of stage 2 and 3, there may only be a few people on either side of that transaction who are aware of the opportunity. During due diligence, that will grow a little bit more. So you may bring in more people from the seller's team. You might say, okay, well, IT needs to come in, maybe some commercial people, maybe you need to bring some technical people then from your team to go and evaluate the technology. And that means also on the seller seller's side, they're going to need to make a few more people available. That's always a negotiation. There's always a bit of humming and hawing and pushing and pulling because, again, the seller wants to, keep the absolute minimum number of people aware of a potential sale, in case the sale doesn't happen, for one, and B, just because it's disruptive, whether it's the actual work itself or just the thought of the sale. I think can be disruptive to a business. And so during that due diligence period, that kind of group of people grows on buyers and sellers teams. Rarely will a customer or a supplier be involved at the due diligence stage, but it does happen. So there's like change of control provisions in potential relationships in which
Right.
a customer is going to need to be informed, or a supplier is going to need to be informed. Um, there's other kind of regulatory things that might involve bringing a customer in, again tied to change of control position provisions, and in some cases the buyer is just really not comfortable with the relationship. And if there's like very high concentration, so if the seller has 70% of their business with a single customer, then the buyer's just not going to get comfortable. That relationship, oh, we've known him for 100 years, and we go golfing together and all that stuff. That's just maybe not enough to write a $20 million check, right? So
Right.
maybe the customer will get introduced kind of in those late stages of phase kind of 4 during due diligence. But typically customers and suppliers get notified, kind of at the same time as after closing as all the other employees. Typically on closing, the seller's employees are kind of notified first. I think it's very important that the buyer gets in front of those employees as soon as possible, like on the day of. You want to be there, either the afternoon of or the next morning, and have some of your key management teams there speaking to employees of the acquired business. And then suppliers and customers, it's really important that they get the letter, some form of communication. Of course, your head salespeople will be speaking to customers. Your purchasing people will be speaking to suppliers. But ultimately, it's really important that members of the buying team go and meet those top 5 or 10 customers, go and meet those top 5 or 10 suppliers, kind of build that rapport, and answer any questions they have. So that's really important as far as kind of the success of the integration, that the communication happens on time and to the appropriate people, as needed, so that you can kind of assuage any doubts or fears, or any other concerns that they may have.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a lot about that last month in our a September episode about the integration process and the timing, and some ideas around internally sharing the information, doing road shows, having forums for your employees to ask a lot of questions, and kind of that same. To me, it's a huge opportunity for customer expansion and generating buzz and newsworthiness around an integration, and what's in it for that was the terminology, like with like what's in it for me in terms of where the employees as well as the customer base. But I do want to kind of talk about, like, in a couple of the deals I've been involved in, customers were a part of the potential acquirers, in a couple of cases, and in other situations where we're talking about like a roll up, and you may be potentially considering um, banding together with your competition, and then those deals don't get done, or though those, in the case of the one deal, like they were sold to somebody else. So what are some of the other risks that should be on the minds of business leaders as they're thinking about acquisition, beyond the integration
Yeah.
risk?
Um, yes, for sure. So, I mean, that's going to come up during due diligence, I think, one big risk is one's own emotions, right? It's very easy to kind of get enamored in a deal, and just be so hell bent on getting that deal done because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And that then makes you kind of willing to overlook certain red flags or say, well, we'll deal with that after close, or that's just not a big deal. So you think of kind of potential compliance issues, cybersecurity. That's a huge one, right? People say, we're okay. They've got an old ERP system. Who cares? Whatever. We'll deal with that later. But I think it's really important to again not get too emotionally attached to a deal, and to not allow that to kind of get you to overlook certain red flags when it comes to compliance, HR issues, cybersecurity, gaps in the product, in terms of how good the technology is, maybe the machinery, right? And saying, oh, the machines are what they are, it's fine. You really want to make sure you've got a list, and you check through all those lists and you weight them, and then you weight the risk of any of those potential issues that come up in due diligence, and then you discuss them amongst yourselves as a team, and you say that, and then you kind of make a decision, collective decision on, well, what are you willing to overlook, and what can you just not overlook at all, and could be potential deal breakers. And so again, those are really important things that people need to kind of consider, and make sure they don't let their kind of emotions get ahead of them on that stuff.
Yeah, I definitely feel like emotion is kind of both a part of the buy and sell side. And I'm curious if in on these smaller deals, if you are seeing people invest in sort of cybersecurity evaluations and a little bit more customer insights or voice of customer research, are you seeing those investments be made? I know on larger deals, we're hearing there's a lot more of beyond EBITDA and some of the financials in diligence. But what are you seeing people, or what are the more trendier things people are investing in?
On the due diligence side.
Yeah,
Yeah, IT is a big one. It's one where in the past there would have been just a couple questions, and that would have been the extent of it. What software do you use? What's your ERP? Okay, right. I mean, it would have
yeah,
been the extent of it. Nowadays, I think any size deal, you're going to want to spend a little bit of money, and even if it's you're bringing in someone from the outside, if you've got a great IT team internally, that's fine. Most small medium businesses work with a managed service provider that can bring in someone for a day, spend the $3,000 today, to go and really try to poke a few holes into what's going on the IT front, and what does their cybersecurity stack look like, and what are their licenses, right? Are they, do they have fully paid licenses for the software they're using? Ask those questions. It's one of those things you just don't want to skip. There's just too much, there's just too many businesses that have been completely paralyzed and just broken. I mean, absolutely ruined businesses, and because of IT issues. And so it's worth investing in. In terms of the accounting due diligence, I think it's also important to, if you've got a good accounting team, bring them in. I wouldn't necessarily advise that you need to do a quality of earnings report on every single business that you acquire. That's a little more costly and time consuming. But do bring in your accountants to go through the numbers and test things. That's what they're trained to do, and it's worth spending the money on it. The attorneys are going to cost whatever they cost. That's something that you kind of can't really get behind. But that's one thing that people need to understand, that the M&A process is expensive, and it's worth it because it saves potentially even bigger issues. And people don't like spending the money. Well, what if the deal doesn't close, or this is just money we're
right.
spending for nothing? But it's really as important to hire the professionals. And even on a smaller deal, if you're going to go, and we talked about the $5 million acquisition, even on a deal like that, it's worth spending the money to bring in a handful of outside people as needed, depending upon the type of business you're acquiring, just to double check things, and
Yeah,
make sure, especially if you don't have those skills in house.
I agree. I and I I think it's just funny because I do think business owners are always looking for how they don't have to pay an attorney for something. I think I just was having that conversation a little earlier. How do I get
Yeah.
this information but not have to pay for it? So, all right, you talk a lot. You talked a bit about the investment. So let's talk about financing the deal. Talk us through what are some of the options and scenarios that smaller businesses or mid-market businesses can lean on to finance an acquisition.
Right. Okay. Obviously, the simplest is just using cash on hand. That's not always a possibility for business owners, or in some cases, just not necessarily what they want to do, because that burns their whole cash pile, which then kind of limits their flexibility later on for other investments that they may need to do, or kind of limits their ability to kind of weather any potential shocks, especially in cyclical businesses or in times where there's a lot of uncertainty. So cash is great, cash is king, but not always the possibility. And when we talk about these financing sources, it's often a combination, right? So in a typical deal, you might see a bit of cash and a bit of debt, bank debt, secured and unsecured bank debt, is maybe the second kind of easiest button to push on financing a deal. There is no equity dilution. It preserves cash. You can also kind of use the target's assets as part of that leverage. Of course, with increased leverage comes its own set of risks, and then you've got covenants. But that cash on hand and bank debt are kind of very typical. And then again, also very typical, in especially in smaller to medium sized acquisitions, is going to be some seller financing, or an earnout. Earnout is it's almost like a financing mechanism. It's one way of having less cash at closing, or bringing less cash to the table at closing. So seller financing, where the seller will take a note for typically kind of 5 to 20% of the acquisition price, something like that. And the buyer will pay the seller over time. That does two things. One, it reduces the amount of cash and kind of bank debt that needs to be funded. But it also, I think, really kind of focuses the seller on the long-term performance of the business as well. So they'll have some kind of interest in making sure that the business does well going forward, so that the buyer can kind of pay out that note. Earnouts are even kind of more tied to the performance, but it's just another way of structuring a deal in which it's not just all cash up front, and it's kind of tied to the actual performance of the business. Equity financing is another option. I think most business owners would prefer not to have to give up equity if they can. In some cases, equity financing can involve the actual seller themselves. So the seller it agrees to roll over some of their equity into the combined unit. Is one way of doing it. And the other case is finding kind of outside investors who are willing to lend to the business for that acquisition in exchange for both the note and or some equity as well. So there's just a myriad of ways that things can be structured. And again, the simplest and less risky option is cash on hand, and then maybe after that bank debt, with a combination of some help from the seller as well, as far as not diluting your business and kind of getting it too entangled with equity and new shareholders and new board members and other restrictive covenants that could encumber your business. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I've also heard people using property to finance, some equity within a property to finance a deal, SBA loans on little smaller deals as well. So there are a lot of options out there. Who usually is that an investment banker that is making some of those options and weighting some of those options for the buyers? Who usually helps a business leader make those calls, or CFO?
Yeah, I think either the CFO internally will begin looking at those options. I mean, I think you start by going to your regular banking relationship and see if your day-to-day bank is willing to help fund the acquisition, and then if that doesn't really work out or pan out, or if you want to kind of look at all your alternatives, then either an investment banker or some sort of kind of private credit dealer should be able to kind of help put some options on the table for you, and then even kind of shopping that debt and bringing kind of the right equity and debt partner to the table for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's been interesting to see. We've seen a number of deals get partially financed by even partnering with a private equity firm with a longer term or a longer tail, you know, exit for all parties to kind of building and having two options for out. So there's just like so many different deal structures. It's pretty interesting to kind of hear the different financing options and the ways people are structuring these deals.
Right.
So let's talk a bit about readiness. I think readiness, like as you said, can be a very emotional decision for both the buyer and the seller. So talk a little bit about what questions should a privately held owner be asking themselves to assess their readiness, or if they're really prepared.
Right. I mean, I think the first thing is that they ask themselves is, are there any lifestyle constraints? Right? Do you really want to take on the additional work? And with that, the additional risk as well. So that's probably the first question that they should ask themselves. But then digging maybe a little more, deeper into their own business is, is the company ready? Is the team ready to be able to kind of take this stuff on? And are you, do you really, if you're going to be growing, if you're going to be going, if you're going to be buying a much, a bigger business, you might need to be adding kind of new executive management to the business. And, are you ready for that? And that in itself is, an effort to kind of onboard new senior leadership. And so those are things that a business owner should ask themselves. Of course, there's the financial element to it as well, right? Do you have a strong enough balance sheet that you can kind of either, give up cash and, or also take on, new debt? So those are things are really important things to ask. And then it's again the question of need versus want. And is it something that you want to do or have to do, or and those are the things that kind of I think need to balance out. But certainly having your own business in order as much as possible. I know no business ever runs itself great. Like everything looks ideal and nice from the outside, but every business is going to have their fair number of fires that they're putting out on a regular basis. But it's really about managing that risk and making sure that you're not adding kind of more to the fire than your team can handle, or yourself as the owner or CEO of the business can handle, or that your finances can handle.
Yeah, and I know that that's something that you were specifically hired to manage. I think time. We talk a lot about money, but I think time sometimes is a even a more precious resource for smaller or mid-market organizational leaders. And
Yeah.
uh, do you really have the capacity to lead this type of initiative, or do you really need to bring in somebody to help consult or manage the process for you, or a few people to help manage the process for you versus trying to do it with your own internal resources? I know, the one thing you hear owners that have sold their businesses talk about most is how much more time than they ever expected it to take. In preparing to sell a business, I would assume that would be very similar into it is in terms of experiences as buying a business, that it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of work, even if you do have somebody that you brought in to help lead some of the lead the charge, or it has a dedicated role within your organization.
So
So if when you're thinking about the future, what are some of the industries or market conditions that are creating the most opportunities for private companies to buy rather than, to try and build these skills or capabilities or expansion plans within their own organization?
Um, Yeah, so I mean, one of the big drivers of M&A is kind of fragmented businesses. So if you look at private equity firms, they tend to try to identify industry that is mostly made up of smaller businesses, smaller privately held businesses, and then they will go in and buy the platform we talked about, and then try to kind of gobble up all these small businesses. And so, I mean, that's an area that you could either emulate that tactic yourself as a small business owner, or realize that if you don't emulate that tactic, then a number of private equity firms might do that. And with that, they're going to come with the scale and the purchasing power and the technology and certain things that may make the competitive landscape even more difficult for you. And so if you are in a highly fragmented industry, it's certainly worth understanding kind of what's going on out there. Every business owner has heard of competitor X being bought out by somebody, and that's so it's not like it's a completely foreign concept, but understanding why and the strategy behind why maybe some of these investment funds are doing that what's going to be helpful for the small to medium business owner to know maybe what's coming and to be prepared for that, and again maybe try to emulate that a little bit to kind of build up that moat around their own business. Of course, it's hard to not talk about automation and robotics and AI and those types of things. Those are really, I think, going to and have been influencing most businesses. So, being aware of that, and if you're in a business that could potentially be highly disrupted by those trends, it's worth considering how and why and whether or not M&A is a way of again building that moat around you to kind of strengthen your defense against any potential issue, as well as give you the scale that makes it possible to be able to invest in those technologies that you would otherwise not being invested in. Reshoring is another trend, again, coming from the manufacturing lens, and so to think about that, whether or not, we're going to see as much reshoring as maybe people hope, but that does appear to be kind of a trend that's been around for a little bit now. I think it's important to kind of think about HR and people if you're looking to grow your business, but you're in a particular area where it's just hard to come by people. Sometimes you can almost need to buy yourself into a business so that you have access to a stronger labor pool or just a bigger labor pool, whatever it may be. And then kind of likewise with that is the concept of geographic expansion, which may also involve gaining access to a better labor pool as you go.
Yeah, I feel like you've touched on so many of the conversations that I've been a part of in CEO forum conversations, as well as with clients and prospects. Thinking about being sort of tapped in a particular category and really having to diversify your revenue streams by adding additional, capabilities that may use that same like manufacturing equipment, but will allow you to capture a new part of the market that you're not currently selling in. I mean, and I've seen a lot of older businesses that just haven't matured their infrastructure. They haven't really invested in technology. They haven't advanced. And the ability to catch up it is just going to be impossible. They just don't have the time or financial ability to do those types of things. So I think those are, things where I've thought either you need to merge with somebody else or you need to think about an acquisition in order to get to, a level playing field with other people in the marketplace. Well,
Right.
I mean, this is a lot of information to consume. I do feel like this is going to be a hot button conversation. As we said, we're going to see more and more market consolidation, transfer of leadership over the next few years with the baby boomer population that will be exiting the workforce. So I really appreciate you sharing some of your thoughts with us and your experiences. It was just such a pleasure to have you on today.
Likewise, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
I do want to thank you, Barnett, officially, and let people know how they can get a hold of you or connect with you if they've got additional questions. We put up Barnett's LinkedIn login and his email address. So if you've got any questions or you want to talk to Barnett about, your own appetite for acquisition, please put business as unusual in the subject line so he knows where the question is coming from. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We've got two incredible sponsors, HR Source. They really are that go-to resource for employers. They've got so many value adds in their membership. It's an association. They've got an HR hotline. They have fractional HR support. They can support you with your human capital legal issues. It really is a great resource for employers. And then another thanks goes out to M3 Learning. They are the proactive selling experts. So they do a lot of transformative coaching and training for sales teams to help improve accountability and lasting results. And the exciting news is next month we will be talking to the new CEO of M3 Learning, Christine Rogers, and it's a kind of an acquisition story in itself. Christine really has embarked upon a remarkable journey. M3 Learning was owned and operated by legendary sales trainer and author Skip Miller, and he died not too long ago. And Christine, within a few days, stepped in to trying to preserve his business and secure that really valuable intellectual property, and began to take the company through a new journey to revitalize proactive selling methodology for kind of this new era of sales. So it's going to be fun to hear her acquisition story and some of the things that she's been thinking about in sort of really honoring Skip's legacy, and then what's on her mind for reinventing what's next for M3. So please join us for that session upcoming. And I also want to just thank everyone for joining us on this session of Business as Unusual. We really unpacked a lot of the fundamentals of M&A. I mean, I learned so much. I feel like I learned so much. This is a big topic, so there is a lot to it. And, I hope people are taking away some things of when it makes sense to think about acquisition as part of your growth strategy, how you might finance it, and then what are some of the potential red flags, and whether you are considering acquisition in your growth strategy or something else. If you've got questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on the Red Caffeine team. We're happy to help you through or consult you on any of those questions. And with that, I want to say until next time, keep challenging the usual and building the kind of business that people want to work with and for. Thank you.